Welcome.
Good morning to all. Welcome at our conference, Social Innovation Next Steps in the Energy Transition. My name is Thomas Hoffa on behalf of the Platform of Social Innovation in the Energy Transition. And Gerdien, you can also introduce yourself.
Yes, welcome everybody. I'm Gerdien de Vries, and we are both from Delft University, the University of Technology. And we're going to slowly start the introduction, and we'll wait a little bit more, maybe till people are coming in, and then have a proper start of this first conference day of this two-day conference on social innovation in the energy transition. The next steps. And I will see if I have to open someone. So, of course, we are all online, and this is a new platform we work with. So this is the first session, and we have to see a little bit how everything works. But I think that will all be perfect. Thomas, shall I just start?
Yeah, let's just start.
Okay. So very welcome from many countries. Hopefully you are in here. And as I already said, Thomas and I are from the Delft University of Technology, and we are the founders of the Platform for Social Innovation in the Energy Transition. And we founded this platform 4 years ago, actually because we wanted to give a kind of an opportunity to show the kind of research we did on the social scientific research on the energy transition. A lot of research is going on at our university, and a lot of the research that's going on is technical research, and we are actually doing also research on the social part and on social innovation. So Thomas and I decided to put the spotlight onto that, and with funding from our Delft Energy Initiative, which is an initiative as part of our university. We organized a large conference back in 2017, a live conference here in Delft, and we had a very good responses to that. So we had good speakers, we had good responses afterwards. We were able to launch a special issue on this topic of social innovation in the energy transition, and also after the conference, we had a lot of collaborations going on. So because this was so successful, we decided to go for it again. We applied for funding again at the university, and got some money to do this. And we are very pleased that the conference is very popular already. We have over 100 speakers. We have very good and very well-known keynote speakers, which we're very pleased with. And we have over 550 registrations now. So it's always, we don't know yet who's there in the end, of course, but we hope to see you all online. I think what is important to say a little bit more is why this topic is so important for us and what we understand if we talk about social innovation in the energy transition. So I will give the floor to Thomas, the other founder, Thomas Hoppe, who is in his home, and will say a little bit more about that. Thomas, can I give the floor to you?
Thank you, Gerdien, and thanks for the introduction. So going back to when it all started, all of a sudden there was all next to attention to the technical parts of sustainable energy transitions. There was finally a window of opportunity to also pay attention to the human side of energy transitions. And so focusing on the social or the social scientific dimension. And by then it was, back in 2016, it was coined social innovation in the energy transition. But the quest for us was, what does it mean scientifically? Is it a disciplinary term? Is it a multidisciplinary term? How can we conduct research into this? So then in 2017, when things got rolling, we started to organize our first conference, already 4 years ago by now. Then we also did a literature study to find out what it was all about. So basically, if you look to social innovation, what does it mean? Basically, new ideas that work in meeting social goals. But when you apply this to something like a social technical challenge, which is both social, material, and technical, yeah, then the thing is also, is it only necessary to meet social goals, or do you also want to achieve something more material that changes the environment in a positive way? So then we started searching in other ways, and then we found out that at Erasmus University, Drift had a very interesting project called Transformative Social Innovation, and they were also looking into social innovation, and they defined social innovation therein as changes in social relations involving new ways of doing, organizing, framing, or knowing. And they applied it to a new theoretical framework they designed called Transformative Social Innovation, in which they see social innovation not just as a phenomenon or instrument, but as a process through which social innovations challenge, alter, or replace established dominant regimes, like the centralized fossil-fueled energy regimes. And they see this as a kind of journey. And then, yeah, when looking at the type of social innovation research in the energy transitions in which we were working ourselves, which had a lot to do with framing, in decision making, co-creation, co-production of energy transition with citizens, but especially also community energy, citizens cooperatives being active in energy transitions. Then we also, we did again a literature study, which was going to be part of our guest editorial note in the sustainability special issue. And then we defined social innovation in the energy transition, so already applied to the energy transition domain, as innovations that are social in their means and contribute to low carbon energy transition, civic empowerment, and social goals pertaining to the well-being of communities. To cover, let's say, the way we conducted research into this topic. But 1 year later, this was criticized again as being too much instrumental in an article by Wittmeyer et al. And tomorrow, Julia Wittmeyer will also give a keynote, because she's working on multiple European projects that cover social innovation in the energy transition. And we'll also like to see how the research develops in that regard. So, well, going back to the platform of social innovation in the energy transition at Delft University of Technology. Well, 2 years ago, we wrote this, basically this request for more funding. And we had a very ambitious plan, including lunches, breakfasts, with all kinds of presentations being organized in a real-life mode. But then COVID came. So we had to move all our activities online. So what resulted in a large number of webinars, which we organized, and by the way, will continue to do for the next years to come as well. And of course, we organized the conference, which you see right now. And what we established was especially valorization and the sharing of the results and insights from ongoing research in social innovation in the energy transition on topics like co-creation in the heating transition from the European funded SHIFT project, but also from co-creation with citizens in regional energy strategies using the participatory value evaluations. So we used a lot of new methods that are used to research this. Another example is the use of agent-based modeling in thermal energy cooperatives, which was presented 3 weeks ago by Jan van Schiervoelandvat, who will also be presenting at our conference, by the way. And other topics address energy and gender, but also the changing role of decentralized government in energy transitions. And based on content, this is what I would like to mention to kick off the conference. I will give the word back to Devine, and I hope you enjoy the conference a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. We made quite a journey with this whole social innovation concept. And hopefully there's more to come. Therefore, the theme of this conference is the next steps. And we're looking very much forward to see all your inspiring talks and presentations on this topic. So more of the practical note, you are here on this platform, so you made it. It works best when you have all other things that you are watching online out, and that you have Google Chrome, no VPN. It is a kind of a heavy platform that we work on, and we are heavily loaded because we have so many sessions also at the same time. But if you have any issues, then reach out to one of our student assistants. We are here in Delft. We have a whole floor. You cannot see that, but we will put some pictures maybe online later. But we are here on the floor, and we have a couple of student assistants available, and you will see them throughout the 2 days. So every session has a chair and a moderator. So we have all the possibilities to help you out when that help is needed. Furthermore, you can look at the program and actually also save sessions that you like. So you have your personalized favorite sessions combined so that it's easy for you to switch from one to the other. And having said that, I think it's time to introduce our keynote speaker. And I will do that in a nice way, hopefully. So you can read a lot about him online, so I will not repeat everything that is out there. But we are very pleased to have the conference opened by Patrick Devin Wright. And Patrick Devin Wright is a full professor in human geography at the University of Exeter. He had a very interesting background in environmental psychology and is looking at, as we are all doing here, at the social aspects of the energy transition, and in particular citing controversies and NIMBYism, public participation, community engagement. Actually, I have some PhDs at this moment who work with his work, and when I did my PhD, I also used his work. So for me also personally, it's very interesting to have you here, Patrick. You want to understand people's relationship with place and the attachment with place identity, and how the public is imagined and engaged by policymakers and industry. And I think what you are going to present today for this group is very relevant. And what I especially also like about it is that it is a story of hope. You are also working, by the way, I have to mention that, of course, because you work in the SHIFT program with Thomas, and you know each other also. So I wanted to mention that before I forget that. But we are very proud to have you here and to elaborate on the positive principles for energy transitions and social innovation, because a word of hope is a good start of the conference. So Patrick, if you are ready for it, I would like to invite you to the floor. So you can come in, turn on your camera and your microphone. And I'm not sure if that works already, because I can see not yet who's in there. Maybe one of the student assistants already can help out here. If not, then I will just continue until Patrick is in. Maybe it's also good to say something about Q&A sessions, or Q&A in general. As you can see, there's this possibility in this platform that we are in to ask questions and ask for answers. So actually, the moderators can moderate it, so we can have a view on what questions are being asked. Maybe there are multiple questions about the same topic, so they can be bundled and answers can be provided. So it's good for you to know that you can use this Q&A button. It's good also to know that it might be better to use Q&A than to use the chat, because the chat is visible for everybody, and it can be a little bit much when we have hundreds of people doing that at the same time. So please use the Q&A if you have questions. Also, during the keynote speakers, if you have questions, you can type them in. The moderators will moderate them. And yeah, I think that's about all the household information that we have. I can tell you a little bit more about the program maybe. So first we have, and I have a large papers here, so I can actually also see it, because we have so much to do. But we start first with the keynote presentation of Patrick Devin Wright, as I introduced already, and we wait for him to come in. We saw him already this morning and tested, so I know that he's there. So we have to see what it takes now to get him back. So after the keynote presentation, that will be at 10:45. We have a small coffee break, so you can take your favorite coffee at home. We also have a coffee break here in Delft. And then between 11 and 12, there's the first series of workshops. So there are 4 workshops, one about serious game, gender, just energy decision making, one about a research handbook project on low carbon communities. There's a workshop on smart local energy systems, data for change, people and communities, and one on circular economy bottom up, learning from circular citizens in Finland and Russia. And there we have Patrick coming in. Hi, Patrick.
Hello, hello.
It's the start of the first day with a new platform. So
yeah,
I used the time to tell a little bit more about the program. And I introduced you, and I also said that I personally use your work, and my PhD student do as well. We once met in A Coruña, I think, during an environmental psychology conference, but it was already a while ago. But I'm very happy to have you here. Thomas is very happy to have you here because of your collaboration. And then I will mute myself and give the floor to you if you are up to it.
I'll certainly do my best. Thank you.
Yep.
Let me see if I can make this work. We're all learning this new platform. So perhaps you could just confirm that you can see my slides now, so I'm ready to start.
Slides.
Yep. Yeah, you can? Yes. Yep. Okay, lovely. All right, well, thank you so much for that invitation. And I was actually listening the whole time, but I had to kind of log out and get back in again. So a bit of learning going on this morning. And thank you very much to you both for this invitation. It's still rather early in the morning in the UK, but I'm hoping that over the next half an hour or so, I'll be able to share some stimulating thoughts and ideas about social innovation and energy transitions, which keep people awake or wake people up if they need to be woken at this time of day. And as Gerjan just noticed, I've put a deliberately positive pitch on this presentation because I think, you know, just coming hot on the heels of COP26, it's easy to feel a little bit despondent at times about the pace of change and the urgency with which we need to respond to the climate emergency. So anyway, yeah, I'm going to, I guess, position my talk around those 2 major concepts of place and participation, and hopefully that will become apparent as we go through the slides. And I think the other thing to note, I think, around that positioning of my talk is that it really stems in a way from both a long-standing interest in doing research that is both theoretically informed but has some real-world application, and then more recently my experiences at the very local level being part of a social enterprise, social innovation on community energy in Exeter, getting involved in that organization and trying to help it to move along, but also being involved at the international level at the IPCC and really getting a sense of the urgency of this situation and the need for academics to step up and to co-create futures with stakeholders and make sure that the messages of our research, our social science research, as much as our climate science, is being heard about, not just being written up in wonderful journal papers, although it is nice to hear that people are reading those and using those, which is great. Anyway, I'll crack on because I know there isn't a huge amount of time, and we'll get going. Hopefully I can move to the next. Yeah, so I think really my first slide here is kind of foundational, but probably doesn't need an awful lot of explanation to this kind of audience. It will be, I hope, pretty consensual that we live in a time of climate emergency. There's a need for urgent action to mitigate climate change, and that tends to come down to these key topics of decarbonization, access to energy, clean energy for all, which is a sustainable development goal. And I think I'm particularly interested myself in the scale of the electrification required. If we're going to pull back from using oil and gas for heating and for transport, and if we're going to increase the amount of renewable power to sustain that demand, increased demand for electricity, then we have an incredible and rapid process of infrastructural change that is going to take place over the coming few decades. And it will really reach into our everyday lives and everyday practices, but it will have significant impacts on landscapes and seascapes as well. So there's many things at stake here. And I think that warrants sustained social science attention and robust research to complement all of the effort that's going into the engineering, the technical side of things as well. And over the last 5 to 10 years, we have had a huge burgeoning interest in energy social science across a number of different disciplines and areas of work. We've had a rapid acceleration of new concepts and theorizations, almost bewilderingly quick at times, which is absolutely fantastic. And I hope that this continues to grow and to be influential over current decades. But having said that, what I'd like to do today is just to focus in a little bit on what we could call space and place aspects of energy transitions and energy social science more generally. And I guess that comes from my own particular background in environmental psychology and more laterally human geography, a geography department. So if we focus in on the spatial aspects of energy transitions, I mean, often our theories really overlook this in substantive ways. It can be completely absent. It can be sometimes used purely metaphorically, which can be confusing. And sometimes the places where energy events happen are simply seen as a backdrop, like a stage upon which the actors stroll around and do important things. And I guess one of the key arguments and claims of spatially oriented social scientists on energy transitions is that you have to think a bit further than that. You have to do a bit more than that. And it's not just saying that country A is different from country B, or case study A differs from case study B because they're different places or different communities. It's something more than that. And that's what theorizations in space and place try to do. So there's been some quite useful work done on spatial aspects, looking at translocal dimensions of energy activities, multi-scalar approaches to socio-technical transitions and reconfigurations. Concepts like spatial imaginaries, for example, are useful for this. Yet I think what I would claim is that there has been lots of really useful emphasis upon spatial aspects of energy transitions over the last 10 years, but there still needs more work done on the place-related focus of this. I think that's still comparatively overlooked, and that's one of the things I would like to tackle in my talk today. And furthermore, we have a kind of a sociocultural legacy that when relationships with places are taken into account, it's often using what I would regard as really inadequate concepts like the NIMBY concept to describe people's kind of very self-interested connections to place, which really are incomplete and inaccurate, as has been shown by lots of research. Anyway, coming back to participation, obviously a key fundamental aspect of social innovation, and something that I began coming across as a term over 10 years ago in looking at repeated cases of community objections to wind power projects and other renewable energy infrastructure projects. Why do people on the one hand say that they think these energy technologies are great, but on the other hand you get such local intense controversies around particular siting decisions? So for a long time there's been an emphasis upon procedural justice and injustices in the way in which decisions are taken, the way in which engagement and consultation takes place, and the degree to which communities actually have a say in decision making. And partly in response to that, there was this upsurge in interest in community energy about 15 years ago. And I was involved in research with Gordon Walker and others from an early stage, which really put high levels of participation at the center of what we mean by community energy initiatives, even if it's still a rather flexible and ambiguous concept in many ways. And energy cooperatives, just like the one that I'm involved in Exeter Community Energy, these are social innovations that are about increasing deployment of renewable energy, but they're much more than that. They have aspirations for systemic change, for enhancing societal participation, for creating new spaces for democratic engagement, and not just in developed societies like the UK or the Netherlands, but on a global basis. If you look at reports from the World Wind Energy Association and IRENA, it is just as much about access to energy for all in terms of potential and participation, not just dealing with decarbonisation in developed countries. And as Thomas mentioned, the SHIFT project that we are both involved in starts with the premise that co-creation might be a useful pathway to unlock sustainable heating transitions, which are very, very difficult, demanding transitions because they encompass different actors, different scales, different agendas. But as we found, co-creation itself opens so many questions up around what exactly it means. And restrictions to engagement in recent times to do with COVID, which make it more difficult to build trust and relationships amongst different stakeholders and communities. And also, I would say, a long-standing tendency to talk about co-creation, but when you look at what is actually done on the ground, look at practices in critical case studies, as we're trying to do, then you have a tendency for stakeholders to fall back on old conceptions of limited interest and information deficits, which serve to rationalize and justify quite limited possibilities for co-creation when you actually get down to it on the ground. And so it is a potent reminder then that participation in energy transitions remains an intensely political and politicized exercise. And we can go back to Arnstein's ladder, which is still useful to some degree in pointing out the degree to which there is great potential for tokenism, for placation, for manipulation, whenever we see even supposedly co-creation or participation. So as social scientists, we need to be always alive to the possibility that what is said is not actually what is done, even if co-creation will still offer a lot of potential. And of course, there's a lot of positive policy announcements around this, particularly in the clean energy framework and emphasis upon citizen energy and renewable energy communities. I think that's a really positive sign. But on the other hand, in the UK, it is much more ambiguous. And we've had a retreat in policy from community energy to the concept of local energy, which really takes out, I think, an emphasis upon the value of grassroots innovation and participation. So this slide is really a little primer on place, and I don't really have a great sufficient time, I suppose, to go into the details of this. But I think one of the demands of thinking with place is to shift our ontology towards a much more situated perspective on energy transitions, getting away from what is a really difficult tendency to keep thinking about it in terms of technologies, heating, hydrogen, carbon capture, wind turbines. That's where we tend to start. Instead, to kind of shift our understanding to a world of places and an idea that places matter, but also places differ. We look outwards from places and we realize the idiosyncrasies and particularities of different communities, different settlements, different parts of countries, which makes a difference in what happens in those locations. And there's a whole swathe of theory on this concept from different disciplines over the last 30, 40, 50 years. And they all point to the fact that place is dynamic, it's relational, and it's political. So it isn't a fixed thing, it doesn't have fixed boundaries, but it's about a combination of things. It is material and technological, it's discursive, and it's embodied as well. So it's a real challenge from a research point of view to try and capture these different aspects. Now, one of the things about our relationships with place is that they can have great value to us in terms of our psychological well-being. They can support belonging, self-esteem, a sense of meaning and purpose to our lives. And they can also motivate participation, and that's what I wanted to emphasize here. Why would people participate in energy transitions if they're not particularly interested in sustainable heating or carbon capture? And one of the things that senses of place and place attachments can do is to help us to understand why people might be motivated to participate. And doesn't mean that they're only interested in localities in a very insular way, but it also recognizes that sometimes fundamental changes to places that matter to people in their lives actually can have great harm if they have no control in that, and those changes are extensive and negative and interpreted to be negative. So there's very much a dark side as well as a positive side to place attachments and our senses of place. And that comes out, unfortunately, in energy transitions too. So if we think for a second about what a place-centered view of energy transitions might look like, I want to say on the one hand, touching on maybe the political ecology of it, we can view energy projects and technological deployment as acts of place-making, which unmake existing places and remake them in ways that are not just material, but also about meanings and effects, about lived experiences and daily practices. And that's the challenge which I think energy social science has in getting across to policy, but also to our disciplinary colleagues in engineering and technical sciences. So we have the opportunity then to investigate how stakeholders in energy transitions employ particular framings of places when they try and justify, when they try and support, or contest and object to particular energy proposals in given places. And of course, this is relational. It's not just about that particular place, but it's about that in relation to national energy policy targets or global imperatives or regional initiatives. And it's the relationality of that that we can actually research in looking at the ways in which different place frames butt up against each other as part of the politics of siting and engagement. And so we can recognize that there are many different actors involved in placemaking, and grassroots community groups are just one of those actors, but municipalities are too, intermediaries of various kinds, multinational companies, but it's not a level playing field in any way. And some actors have much more potential to get their version of future place visions across than others because of differential access to power and resources. But we also need to think about what it looks like from the experience of people on the ground, from the residents, from the communities there. And if we use a place-centered view, we have an opportunity to view people not just as citizens, but as denizens. And that's people who dwell in and feel a sense of connection and belonging to a particular place. And I don't think you get that when you use imaginaries of publics that are from more market-oriented approaches, energy customers or consumers, technology users. These are useful framings, but they don't capture the situatedness, the embeddedness in place of people. And that, unfortunately, can lead to misrecognition, which we found in our research, where people's connections to valued local places is simply not sufficiently recognized. And when you conceive people in this way, it means that you recognize and value local knowledges, which is important around the politics of expertise, who is thought to be expert around disputes in energy siting. It means you take account people-place relations and all their complexities, place attachments and place identities, etc. And also means that you recognize that these place attachments can underpin why people choose to participate in community energy projects. I also want to stress very carefully that this isn't really just about energy, and that comes back to the positive positioning of this entire talk. There's so much else at stake at the moment. We have had increasing precarity in labor markets over the last 20 years. We've also just come through, and we're still actually marred in, a pandemic which has restricted and replaced people in terms of where they can go, what they can do, who they can see. COP26 has just finished. There is a great sense of anxiety around the future, particularly in younger generations, and a great sense of frustration at the slow pace of policy making. And we have these cross-cutting intersectionalities and structural inequalities that cut across each of these societal challenges. And they make a difference to the amount of space that people have, their ability to move, whether you are experiencing these challenges from a small, impoverished environment in urban inner cities, or whether you're lucky enough to live in the countryside and have access to clean air and open spaces and possibilities to roam around and have contact with nature. And we have policies around leveling up in this country and recovering from COVID, but we need to be careful and be critical of the discourse coming out of this and see perhaps place and participation as emancipatory possibilities for local and translocal belonging and anchoring, for empowerment and sustainability that not just enable and further energy transitions, but give people a sense of identity and belonging, which can help to address these other multiple challenges that communities and individuals and societies face at this current moment in time. So I guess this leads to a question: what if we aim to achieve the energy transitions we are all interested in here and more through trying to enhance sense of place and through empowering communities. That's where social innovations come in, but also maybe an awareness of the emplacement of those initiatives. And I'm going to give very briefly, because I know I don't have too much time, very briefly, little snapshots of 3 different case studies and projects that I'm involved in that raise some questions around each of these issues in, I hope, an informative way. And I'm going to start with shale gas. And one of my projects called Assist, and I'm going to take you all to a place which is near Liverpool. I guess most people, if they've got any interest in football, will recognize Liverpool, Manchester. So it's this part of the northwest of England, and a small little place called Great Altcar in the community, in the countryside north of Liverpool. And Formby, I guess most people will not know too well, but it's a town close to this location where shale gas was first proposed back in 2018. And I guess the thing to point out very early in relation to place is that the green line on this map on the right-hand side is a major road. And just to the right-hand side of that, there is an institutional boundary between, on the left-hand side, a borough called Sefton, which is part of Liverpool, and on the right, the Lancashire County Council area. So we have an institutional boundary which makes a difference in terms of which councils, which municipalities deal with planning applications for shale gas exploratory drilling. Now, in this case, the map on the right is taken from a document called the Statement of Community Involvement, which was submitted by the developer as part of their planning application to explore for shale gas under the ground in this context. And of course, shale gas has been seen for much of the last 10 years in England and the UK as a great promising potential to reduce energy prices, increase energy security, boost growth, in a way that very much trying to copy the narrative from the United States and the impacts of shale gas exploration over there. But of course, it's been hugely controversial at the same time. And in that context, and there's been effective bans in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. So in England, you might think that developers faced with quite a lot of societal pressures and objections, social movements that are saying we shouldn't be doing this because it is accelerating climate change and it might lead to all kinds of unwelcome environmental benefits. You might expect that developers and operators would reach out and try and do extensive community engagement and consultation to try and win people over. But that's really not what we found. I mean, first of all, if you see this orange blob on the map, that is what the developer decided was the impacted community. They simply drew a radius of 1.5 kilometers around the drill site on the right-hand side of the boundary and said, okay, this is the community, these are the people we're going to engage with, and that's what we're going to do across that area. So you have people living in Formby who are very likely to be affected by horizontal subsurface drilling, who were not directly involved in the engagement process at all. And that's what I mean by unmaking place, because these people have connections, they have fears, they have concerns about local exploration for shale gas and fracking, but they were not directly involved in the process at all because of the way in which the operator took forward their community engagement plans. And we can see that a little bit more in this slide. The developer made the claim in this document that in accordance with policy, extensive consultation has been taken with the community as summarized in this document. If you look at the table, well, there was a phone line, there was an email address, there was a website, a couple of newspaper ads, 2 public events were conducted, but not anywhere near that area in another village to the east of the site. Letters were sent out to key local stakeholders and to residents. And there was a proposal to hold a kind of a new body, create a new body called a community liaison group. But it was only going to be set up, according to this plan, after planning consent had been given, which I think is simply too late. And the other thing is that there was no impact of any of this limited engagement on the planning application. None of the issues raised at or as a result of either of the 2 information events have resulted directly in any changes to the proposed development. So nothing they came up with was significant enough for them to think that they needed to rechange or reform their planning proposals. And this suggests inadequate consultation at best, tokenism at worst, I would say, and what happens when you do not really take place or participation into account in energy consultation. And the irony of all this is that shale gas has been hugely controversial in many European countries, but also in England. And you would think that maybe they would try and go a little bit further, but not according to this evidence. In terms of our second case study, it's in the realms of local energy. And this is a case study from the Energy Rev research project called Zero Carbon Rugeley, which is in the Midlands. And as you can see from the photograph on the right, here we have a town that is right on the doorstep of a huge coal-fired power station, which has now been decommissioned. And it is a multi-stakeholder project. It's not either a private sector operator or a local community energy project. It's more of a multi-stakeholder local energy partnership, which includes a whole variety of interesting organizations, including a large energy company, ENGIE, a multinational, but also a university partnership, a theatre partnership, bringing skills of animation and engagement, a community energy group, Chase Community Solar, various public municipality bodies, and all kinds in this partnership. And what interested me about this case and why I wanted to raise it in this talk was that there was a significant amount of resource put into enabling participation. In fact, 1/3 of the budget of this project was being spent on what they called user-centric design. And they also had an important, what I would say, a cross-cutting work plan structure where community engagement wasn't work package 12 and everyone else was doing the technology, the economic issues, the legal issues. It was a cross-cutting engagement structure across every aspect of the project. That, I think, is really important in indicating the centrality and importance given to participation in this context. And just to give you a little bit of a flavor of what came out of the data we collected in our interviews, the first thing to say is that they began with an idea about, okay, it isn't about us taking a technology and trying to sell it to this community, trying to educate them and trying to persuade people that, yes, actually, you really need this technology on your doorstep. Instead of pick a technology or stuff from a system and try and shift people towards that, we start with the people. So a very refreshing, people-centered, community-centered approach to this project. The second thing which came out very strongly was an awareness that this was already an energy place because of the power station. But and interestingly, the getting rid of the power station, the demolition of the towers, an attempt to reinvigorate the place in terms of zero carbon has made the heritage of the place more apparent to people. It's created conversations around place identity and belonging and how you create a narrative for a place which stitches together that coal fossil fuel past to a more zero carbon and hopeful future. And that's wonderful to see. Sorry, the third case I want to make, again, is from my locality of Devin in the southwest of England. And I've been involved in the carbon plan process for the last 2 years. And this is what we would maybe describe as a kind of democratic innovation involving mini publics or small representative samples of members of the public in climate policy making. And the pathway of this citizens' assembly has been quite turbulent, really, due to COVID. It led to a delay, a shifting from offline to online, and a refocusing of exactly what it was looking at. But it did take place earlier this year as part of a co-created project which involved both the university as a partner and local stakeholders involved in the emergency response. And it focused on 3 key issues. But I just want to focus in on, very briefly, issues about rurality in the countryside, what it's like to live in the countryside and respond to the challenges of climate change. Because one of the key themes coming out of the actual assembly findings, if you look at the resolutions on the right, but also the research that we've been doing, is a great concern about people being left behind in marginal, peripheral, rural areas. And unfortunately, a decision to do expert hearings as part of this carbon process in 2019, unfortunately, it further reinforced a sense that there were some areas of this county and this region that were marginalized and being left behind. So there's a great challenge here, I think, in our own sense of urgency to enable everybody to be part of it. And the difficulty in terms of sustainable heating transitions and sustainable mobility transitions in particular, to deal with areas which have been historically and structurally left behind in processes of transformation, economic development, etc. And what happened in the assembly was that stick policies, financial sticks to charge people more, to make it more difficult for people to park, more difficult for people to drive into the towns and cities in Devon, which sound like very important and useful policies to bring into play to try and respond to the climate emergency, were seen either with not that much support, or were actually simply not passed by the group and were strongly opposed by some participants. And rather than pointing these people and saying, well, they're just being selfish, they're just being NIMBYs, they're just being difficult, they're not being public-minded, we need to think very carefully about how we can reach into these parts of our areas, into these communities, and make those processes of change as inclusive as possible. And that might mean making sure that alternatives are in place first before you start coming down too heavily on people with these kind of stick policies. So having whisked you through those 3 case studies very, very fast, I just want to come to some tentative conclusions about the value of place and participation as positive principles for just energy transitions. I think they offer potential for an emancipatory ontology for just energy, a way of recognizing, a way of enabling better procedures, distributing fairly costs and benefits of the changes that are required in response to climate emergency, a way of thinking through social innovation that is situated in particular contexts, specific particular contexts, conceiving energy projects as acts of placemaking and promoting local belonging. And that in no way waves a magic wand and makes it easy to do things, but it does give us an alternative lens, an alternative perspective to understand what goes on, and maybe just to facilitate that in a better way, a more optimal way. And each of these different case studies tells us something slightly different. The shale gas case tells us something about the unmaking of place. When you misrecognize existing communities, you perform what I would call inadequate and shallow, maybe even tokenistic consultation with partial definitions of community. Also the potential to remake and revive places by co-creating local zero carbon futures with community stakeholders, enabling and strengthening place identities through connecting past and future. And finally, giving voice to people in rural areas, reflecting the fact that placemaking is situated in historical social processes which have pre-exist any given energy or climate activity and need to be addressed very carefully in order to be as inclusive as possible. If we conceive energy transitions as actions which give the potential for sustainable placemaking, we must attend to those multiple registers: materiality, discourse, affects, and everyday practices, and not neglect any one of those, and try and develop our research designs and our conceptual approaches to pay attention to each of those, and to bear in mind that the focus on local places is not insular. It's not parochial in a negative sense. It can be parochial in a positive sense, where we have a confident sense of who we are and where we are, and it's outward looking, not inward looking. And finally, I think it's a call to us as researchers, as academic energy social scientists, to not just do good research, but to get out there, to co-create the innovations we're talking about with local stakeholders who need expertise and guidance. And you frequently look for input if we can provide it at the right time and in the right way. But there is still this challenge and necessity to maintain a critical distance so that we can, if necessary, call out the co-opting of change when people talk about participation, but in reality are doing something else, when vested interests or old kind of ways of thinking take on. We have to maintain that possibility at the very same time. And that is a huge challenge that I don't think we can take lightly in any way. So with that, I will stop. Look forward to any comments, criticisms, and questions you might have. But last but not least, I just want to acknowledge some wonderful colleagues at Exeter working with me on these projects that I mentioned. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Patrick. Can you hear me?
I can actually, yes. Wonderfully. I wasn't sure if I was talking to or just me on my own in my little office, but it's great. There's somebody out there. Yeah.
It is me and a lot of other people in the audience. I think it's time to go to the Q&A, and I have to take a look because I'm in a kind of a dashboard and I have to go to another area to see the Q&A. Okay, let's start with a question that I see here. Let me see. It's a bit of a small screen. Okay, it's a question about NIMBYism in Amsterdam. Maybe you heard about the plans that in Amsterdam there are plans to build windmills, and there is some resistance. And the question is, agreeing that the NIMBYism falls short of explaining resistance, how is it that highly educated urban green left voters are protesting heavily against new windmills around their city, as for example recently in Amsterdam? Can you answer that question or say something wise about this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can speak to the specificity of what's involved in that particular dispute, but I can say two things. One is that I don't think it's very helpful to basically throw mud at people by attributing them as NIMBYs if you actually want to create change. To me, throwing a pejorative insult at a group of people who happen to have a different view from yourself is probably not going to make them more open to listening to you, even if you'd like them to change their views. But the second thing we found in case study after case study after case study of wind power projects is that what people are complaining about is not so much the windmills, it's the way in which the decisions are taken and the lack of transparency, the lack of openness, the lack of equity in the possibility for people to have a stake in their own everyday surroundings. And I think in that kind of context, it makes it a little bit easier, for example, to say why people are feeling upset about proposals to develop these large-scale infrastructures. I mean, of course, there's many different aspects to the reasons why people object, and I'm not at all saying that people are not capable of great selfishness and narrow-mindedness in any way. But the fact is, we need to get underneath the NIMBY label and look at what's actually been happening. And I think the just transition lens really helps that and say, well, are all voices being recognized here? And I think that's part of the challenge around the climate emergency. We need to get on with it and act really fast. But if we leave groups behind, if we ignore what they think, it will probably take longer to do what we need to do because they're simply going to say, it's not going to happen. I'm going to try and fight this. I'm going to put my energies into stopping it. And we can't afford to do that either. So I think that's a great challenge. But I would say that it's probably not about the wind turbines at all. It might be about something else, but you need to do the research in order to find that out.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. And also what you say lastly here, we need research. So it's good that we have this large group of social researchers in this energy domain, and the number of them is growing and growing. Also, we see that in the popularity of this conference, for instance, but also in other ways. I go to France now. There's a question here. What is needed that results of climate assemblies have a strong institutional and political embedding? In France, many recommendations of the Climate Assembly were blocked or watered down by the government and parliament in the aftermath.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I mean, we had a seminar yesterday at my university on the results of that project about the Devin Citizens Assembly. And, I mean, at the stage of the project we're in, we're still trying to figure out our findings to some degree. But I would say that what we really have going on at the moment is public deliberation, like citizens' assemblies, being bolted onto existing political institutions and structures, which is a very welcome development in my view, but it's still bolted onto that existing structure. So, for example, in yesterday's conversation, we were talking about the fact that the 70 participants in the Devin Assembly who've spent 6 weekends getting clued up in expertise around climate mitigation, the assembly is over now. They've disappeared. They're not involved in the political process in any way. It's gone. It's like they've walked off a cliff. So I think we need to think carefully about what happens after the Citizens' Assembly takes place, and that's to do with impact. does it really impact on policy making? And my hope in Devin is that having invested in the assembly, they will need to see it through, and they'll be called out if they don't by local stakeholders, which hopefully will include academics as well, saying, well, you can't do this on one hand and then say, oh no, it's too difficult. We don't like the findings. We'll do something else. You know, having invested in a deliberation in a very public way, then they need to see it through. And I think in that sense, it's very disconcerting and disappointing, really, if in context people go to the bother of doing carefully organized, well-facilitated public deliberations like citizens' assemblies and then ignore the findings. Because, you know, from my point of view, the baseline for all of this is skepticism and mistrust of people in powerful positions. And so this further strengthens that skepticism and maybe a sense of disengagement from policy making by people who you invite in and then ignore. So it's corrosive, I think, for our politics. And so for our energy democracy and energy transitions. And so I'm deeply, deeply worried about that if that's what's taking place. But yeah, I don't have a solution for it. But in Devin, I think one of the things we can do as academics is to not only engage with the process, but to try and follow it up and, you know, yeah, try and give voice to people and make sure that they're involved as far as we can. And if they're ignored, to kick up a fuss about that, maybe.
Ja, die Citizen Assembly also. Er was one large one, een klimaatberaad, klimaatburgerberaad in Amsterdam last week. So the results are also trickling down now in the media. And I think what we also know from research on pseudo voice, that exactly what happens if you give people the opportunity to voice up but disregard their opinions in the end, that the next time there will be complete silence or nonsense that they will share with you because they don't take seriously. So I think we can have maybe 1 or 2 questions if you are still up to it. You can probably read some of the questions and compliments in the Q&A for yourself, but I'm not sure what kind of dashboard you see, because this is also for me the first time I work with this. This question, thanks for the stimulating presentation. Is place attachment a positive framing in order for us to start finding means of resolving value conflicts? If so, what might be an example of bringing people together on values through place?
Okay, well, yeah, I think that was one of the essential claims I was trying to make today, is that place attachment can be a positive framing. And it can enable disparate people who happen to be living in the same area to come together because they have a joint interest in that place. I'm not at all saying that everyone feels strongly connected to where they live, or it's a very important part of who they are. I'm not making those kind of assumptions. But at the end of the day, even with social media and the opportunity to be part of communities and practices, we do share something with our neighbors. We have something common at stake in terms of our local nature, quality of life, clean air, safe streets. These are things, urban green spaces, access to that. These are things we all share in common. And so they offer potential to bring people together in projects of shared interest and common identity. But at the same time, we have to be very careful about co-opting and kind of as I said, there's 2 sides to this coin. The place frames that are employed by stakeholders can really undermine positive visions of place. And so we need to be quite careful about that and not view either community or place in rosy tinted ways, in nostalgic or romantic ways. But yes, I do think they offer potential. And I think I'm making that claim really not just about energy transitions, but as I said, about the kind of displacement that I see arising from Brexit or from populism or from COVID or from, you know, all of these things that are happening at the very same time as energy transitions, and make it more difficult for people to trust each other, to trust democratic institutions, and to work together in the rapid and urgent way that we need to respond to the climate emergency.
Great, thank you. I think what leaves us now is to formally also thank you. And this is also a moment where we introduce our gift to all our speakers, but also all the people who contribute to this conference in a general way. So instead of giving you flowers or a bottle of wine or a gift card, what we decided to do is we buy a tree. And actually, on our website, and maybe we can also place something on our social wall for the people who haven't seen that yet. There's a social wall where you can share information and respond to each other. We will show you that in the northeast of the Netherlands, there will be a forest of the future. And we buy an oak. And this oak will be kept for 25 years. So we pay for the oak to grow into a real big oak, and we also have a plaque there where it states that it's to thank you and all the other speakers for at our conference. And we thought this is a very sustainable gift because this tree will do all kinds of good for nature. And what is fun is that the forest of the future will be visible from Google Earth in the end, because the plan is that it is a flower. So all the trees together in that forest form a flower. And so also the colors of the trees are placed as such that it's a nice view. So Patrick, maybe you can check in every year for the next 25 years to see how the tree is growing. But thank you very much for your time. It's early for you. Enjoy breakfast. And we hope to see you somewhere else. And if you like to stay around and see the program and come to other sessions, of course, we welcome you there.
Well, thank you so much, Gerdien. And I apologize to those people who've asked really interesting questions, but we haven't had time to deal with them. And I would just say, drop me an email and ask me the question, and I'll see what I can do and answer as effectively as I can. But that's a wonderful present, the oak tree, and maybe I look forward to a time when I can actually visit that place and have a quiet moment and enjoy being around nature and the trees in that place. And what a wonderful way to thank people for participating. I think it's great, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So maybe for the other people, it's now a coffee break. I will check my giant chart here. So at 11 o'clock we start with the workshops. So have a coffee, have a tea, enjoy. Maybe also a look at the social wall, look at the program, and save all the sessions that you want to go to. And we see you later. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.